They thought they were doomed. Until a human warship emerged from the void. Part 1. The fire started before sunrise. On the planet HFY 4, the sky turned orange long before the sun had a chance to rise on its own. The light came from above, from burning ships in orbit and from weapons that fell like rain. The people of the colony ran. They carried children. They carried food. They carried nothing because there was no time to carry anything at all. HFY 4 was not a military world. It had no army, no warships, no weapons worth speaking of. It was a farming planet, a trading post, a place where 6 different species lived side by side and grew food and sold goods and tried to make a quiet life at the edge of the known galaxy. Nobody had ever attacked it before. Nobody had ever needed to. The Velthari Dominion did not need a reason. They wanted the trade lane that ran through the HFY system. They wanted it badly enough to take it. And so 3 of their warships arrived one morning without warning, without a message, without anything except weapons fire. Elder Tessavon was already awake when the first alarms went off. She was old, older than most of the buildings in the capital city, and she did not sleep well anymore. She had been sitting by a window with a cup of warm tea when the sky lit up. She watched the first explosion bloom in the upper atmosphere like a flower, slow and beautiful and terrible, and she set her cup down very carefully and did not pick it up again. She was taken to the emergency bunker beneath the government building. The bunker was deep underground and smelled like old metal and recycled air. People were already there when she arrived. Staff members, other officials, medical workers. They were all looking at screens that showed the Velthari ships in orbit, and none of them were talking. Tessavon sat down at the main communications console. She looked at the screens for a long moment. Then she began to work. The Orin Collective had already sent distress signals. They had sent them to the Galactic Forum, which was the closest thing the galaxy had to a government. They had sent them to the merchant leagues, who controlled the big trade ships and had influence. They had sent them to 14 independent systems, some friendly, some neutral, some that owed the collective favors from old agreements. Nobody had responded. That was not a surprise. The Velthari Dominion was powerful. It had a large fleet and a long memory, and everyone in the galaxy knew that helping the Orin now meant becoming the Velthari's next problem. The math was simple. It was the kind of math that made cowards out of people who might otherwise have been brave. Tessavon understood this. She had spent 60 years as a diplomat. She knew how fear worked. She knew how powerful people made decisions and how they justified those decisions to themselves afterward. She had sat in many rooms and listened to many speeches about why now was not the right time. She was tired of those speeches. She opened a new channel. Not a targeted message to any government or organization. A broadband signal, open on every frequency the communications array could reach, sent in every direction at once. The kind of signal that spread out through space like a voice calling into a dark room, hoping something was listening. She spoke clearly and slowly, because the translation systems needed time to work and she wanted every word to land correctly. She gave the coordinates of the HFY system. She gave the population count of 11 million. She described what the Velthari ships were doing in plain language, without softening it. Then she asked one question. Just one. She asked if there was anyone out there who was not afraid of the Velthari Dominion. Then she closed the channel and sat back and looked at the ceiling of the bunker and waited. Far away, at the very edge of a quiet sector of space, a ship was moving slowly through the dark. It was not a large ship by the standards of the great galactic powers. It was a heavy cruiser, which meant it was built for serious fighting but not for fleet battles. It had thick armor, strong weapons, and a crew of about 400 people. Its name was the UES Relentless Dawn, and it flew under a human flag. Petty Officer Rosa Vance was at her communications station when the signal arrived. She was a young woman with dark hair and careful eyes, and her job was to monitor deep space transmissions during the quiet hours of the night cycle. It was usually a very boring job. Most of what she picked up was background noise, old data packets, automated navigation beacons. This was different. She sat up straight when the translation came through. She read it twice to make sure she had it right. Then she pulled up the coordinates attached to the signal and looked at how far away they were. Then she picked up the internal comm and called the bridge. Captain Leon Hargrove was already awake. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and a face that had spent too many years looking at problems without showing what he thought about them. He came to the communications station and Rosa handed him the translated message without saying anything. He read it. He looked at the coordinates. He looked at the tactical profile of the Valkyrie Dominion that Commander Priya Nolan was already pulling up on the screen beside him, because Nolan was always 3 steps ahead and she already knew what he was thinking. The Valkyrie fleet data was not encouraging. 3 cruisers. Heavy shields. A combat record that included 14 successful military campaigns and 0 defeats on record. Hargrove looked at Nolan. He said, quietly, "How long to reach the Tespal system at best speed?" Nolan told him the number without looking up from her screen. He nodded once. He told the crew to set course. He did not ask anyone for permission. He filed a notification to Fleet Command, which was the proper procedure, and by the time the acknowledgement came back the Relentless Dawn was already moving. Nobody on the bridge said anything about the odds. They all knew the odds. The odds were not the point. In the bunker on Tespal 4, Elder Tessavon watched the Valkyrie ships continue their slow, deliberate work in orbit above her world. They were not in a hurry. That was the most frightening part. They moved with patience, like people who already knew how the story ended. She did not know that something had heard her signal. She did not know that a ship was already moving through the dark toward her coordinates, that a captain had set a course without asking anyone, that 400 human beings were now pointed in her direction at full speed. She sat in the bunker and waited, because that was all she had left. Outside, the orange light in the sky did not stop. End of part 1. They thought they were doomed. Until a human warship emerged from the void. Part 2. The Relentless Dawn came out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Tespal system, and the first thing Rosa Vance heard was noise. Not sound, because space is silent. But her instruments filled with data the moment they dropped into normal space, and data has its own kind of noise. Alerts. Readings. Numbers climbing fast. She called them out one by one as they appeared, her voice steady and quiet, the way she had been trained. 3 Valkyrie cruisers in high orbit. Shields at full. Weapons hot. One of them had already fired twice in the last hour, long-range shots aimed at the colony's surface shield generators. The colony's shields were holding, but only just. Commander Priya Nolan stood at the main tactical display and said nothing for about 10 seconds. She was mapping everything: positions, distances, weapon ranges, angles of approach. Her face showed nothing while she worked, which was how everyone on the bridge knew she was doing the hardest kind of thinking. Lieutenant Dale Owens, at the weapons station, was also running numbers. He was younger than Nolan and he tended to drum his fingers when he was concentrating, which he was doing now without noticing. Captain Hargrove stood in the center of the bridge and looked at the main screen. The Tespal system spread out before them in pale blue light. The planet below was green and brown, a farming world, ordinary and quiet-looking except for the faint shimmer of the shields being pressed from above. He said, "Get me a channel to the surface." Rosa opened it. The signal went down through the shields and into the bunker, and after a short delay a voice answered. Old. Tired. But steady. Elder Tessavon. Hargrove told her who he was and where he was. He said his ship had come in response to her signal. He said they were assessing the situation. There was a pause on the other end. Then Tessavon said, "One ship." It was not an insult. It was just what she saw on her own screens. 1 human ship. 3 Valkyrie cruisers. Hargrove said, "Yes." He did not explain further. He closed the channel. Across the system, on the largest of the 3 Valkyrie cruisers, Fleet Marshal Draxon was informed that an unidentified vessel had entered the system. His sensor officer identified it within a minute. Human registry. Heavy cruiser class. 1 ship. Draxon was a tall being, gray-scaled and sharp-featured, with 40 years of military service and an absolute certainty that he was the most dangerous thing in any room he entered. He had commanded Valkyrie fleets in 14 campaigns. He had never been defeated. He had never even been seriously challenged. He looked at the report about the human ship and felt something very close to irritation. This was a Dominion operation. Human space was not close. A single human cruiser had apparently traveled a considerable distance to appear at a system that had nothing to do with humanity, in response to a distress signal from a people the humans had never formally allied with. It made no tactical sense. Which meant either the human captain was very stupid or operating on logic Draxen had not yet identified. Either way, the response was simple. He sent a transmission on the open frequency. Short, direct, the way Velthari officers were trained to communicate. He said, "This is a Dominion military operation in Dominion-claimed territory. You are an unrecognized vessel with no legal standing in this system. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." He had sent that exact message, word for word, in 11 of his 14 campaigns. Every time, the other ship left. On the relentless dawn, Rosa handed Hargrove the translation. He read it. He handed it back. He said, "Reply. Send our ship identification, our flag, and our stated reason for being here, which is humanitarian response to a civilian distress signal. Also note that the Velthari Dominion has not filed any legal claim to the Tespal system with the Galactic Forum, and that the Tespal system falls under the Forum's Open Navigation Charter of 2289, which means Dominion military blockades here are not legally recognized." Rosa looked at him for just a moment. Then she sent the reply. On the Velthari command ship, Draxen received it. He read it twice. Then he handed it to his legal officer, who read it and confirmed that yes, technically, the human was correct about the charter. Draxen thought about this for a moment. Then he ordered his ships to move and intercept the human vessel. Some things could not be handled with paperwork. Down on Tespal 4, Tessavon was watching her screens. She saw the Velthari ships change their orbital pattern. She saw them begin moving away from the planet and toward the edge of the system, toward the spot where the human ship had appeared. One of her aides said, "They are going after the human ship." Another aide said, "One ship. They came all this way and it is only one ship." Nobody said anything after that. There was nothing useful to say. The numbers were what the numbers were. 3 large warships were moving toward one smaller one, and the smaller one had not moved, and that either meant the human captain was very brave or had not yet fully understood what he was looking at. Tessavon understood something, though. She had spent 60 years studying people, all kinds of people, from all kinds of worlds. She knew how beings behaved when they were afraid and how they behaved when they were not. The human captain had received Draxen's warning. He had not left. Instead, he had sent back a message about legal charters. That was not the behavior of someone who was afraid. She pulled up everything the Orin databases had on humans. It was not very much. They were a young species, relatively new to interstellar contact. The files described them as emotional, sometimes unpredictable, and surprisingly resilient for beings of their size and biology. There was a note in the diplomatic records that said human negotiators were difficult to intimidate because they often seemed to not notice when they were supposed to be intimidated. Tessavon read that note 3 times. The Velthari ships were still moving. The human ship still had not moved. The planet's surface shields were still holding, but the generators would not last much longer under this kind of sustained pressure. She folded her hands on the table in front of her and watched the screens. She did not allow herself to hope. Hope was something she had used up over the past several days, and she was being careful with what little remained. But she watched the human ship sitting perfectly still in the dark between the stars while 3 Velthari cruisers moved toward it, and she thought about that note in the diplomatic file. Difficult to intimidate. She thought, well, they are about to be tested on that. End of part 2. They thought they were doomed. Until a human warship emerged from the void. Part 3. The Velthari ships moved in a triangle formation. It was a standard approach pattern, clean and efficient. Each ship covered the angles of the other 2. It left very little room for an opponent to move without being caught in crossfire from at least one direction. Draxen had used this formation many times. It worked. Commander Nolan looked at the formation on her screen and said, "They are going to try to box us." Hargrove said, "I see it." She said, "The math on this is not great, Captain." He said, "I know." She said nothing else. She had made her assessment. He had heard it. That was enough. Dale Owens, at the weapons station, finished his calculations and looked up. He said, "I have a window. About 4 seconds, when the lead ship crosses into optimal range before the other 2 get into position." If we fire in that window, we hit their shields before they expect it. Hargrove said, "Take it." Owen's hands moved. He was precise, the way he always was when it actually mattered. The Relentless Dawn's rail cannons fired. The sound of them was a deep, physical thud that moved through the hull, and everyone on the bridge felt it in their feet. The shots crossed the distance in less than a second. They hit the lead Valkyrie cruiser full on the forward shield array, right at the moment when the ship had committed to its approach angle and could not easily change course. On the Valkyrie command ship, Draxon's tactical officer said, "Forward shields on Cruiser 1 at 40%. Draxon stared at the screen. They had fired first. He had not expected that. He had expected the human ship to wait, to try to survive the first exchange and then negotiate or flee. Instead, it had targeted the most vulnerable ship in his formation and fired before the formation was fully in position. He said, "Return fire. All ships." The Relentless Dawn took the first hits hard. 2 shots on the port side, 1 on the bow. The ship rocked. Lights flickered. Somewhere behind the bridge, something heavy fell and broke. Rosa gripped her console and kept working. Nolan held the edge of her tactical display and kept working. Owens did not flinch at all, which was either bravery or focus so complete that he simply had no attention left for fear. Hargrove stood in the center of the bridge and rode the shaking the way a sailor rides a wave. He said, "Engineering, report." The engineering officer's voice came back, "Port armor compromised, Section 7. Weapons still operational. Engines at full." Hargrove said, "Keep us moving." The Relentless Dawn moved. That was the thing about human warship design that the Valkyrie tactical profiles had not fully accounted for. Human ships were built to absorb hits and keep going, because humans had spent most of their history fighting wars against each other, and they had learned that the ships which won were not always the ones that avoided damage. Sometimes they were the ones that took the damage and did not stop. The human ship did not hold position and trade fire the way Draxon expected. It moved constantly, changing its angle, forcing his ships to adjust. Every time they adjusted, the angles between them shifted slightly, and the clean triangle formation became a little less clean. Owens watched for these moments and fired into them. 30 minutes into the engagement, the second Valkyrie cruiser had lost its primary shield generator. It was still fighting, but it was now vulnerable in a way that was making its captain very uncomfortable. An hour in, a shot from the Relentless Dawn caught the third cruiser's engine housing and knocked one of its 3 drives offline. The ship slowed. The triangle formation fell apart completely because the 3 ships could no longer move at the same speed. 2 of the crew of the Relentless Dawn were injured when a console on the lower deck exploded after taking a direct hit. Both were taken to the medical bay and treated. Neither died. Hargrove received a cut across the front of his forehead from a piece of the navigation console housing when a nearby shot shook the bridge hard enough to crack it. A medic came to the bridge to seal the cut. Hargrove did not go to the medical bay. He stood at his station with a sealed cut on his forehead and continued issuing orders. Nolan watched him do this and said nothing. She had known him for 6 years. At the 2-hour mark, the first Valkyrie cruiser, the one that had taken the opening shots at half-shield capacity, had its shield system fail entirely. It was now running on armor alone, which on a Valkyrie cruiser was still considerable, but the captain of that ship had a decision to make. He could continue fighting at full exposure, or he could pull back. He pulled back. He moved his ship out of the main engagement zone and held position at a distance, still threatening, still armed, but no longer closing. Draxon watched this on his screen and felt something he was not used to feeling. He was used to being in control of situations. He was used to the numbers working in his favor. He had run the numbers at the start of this engagement and the numbers had said this should already be over. The numbers had been wrong. He requested reinforcements from the nearest Valkyrie fleet station. He was told they would arrive in approximately 48 hours. He acknowledged this and closed the channel. 48 hours was a long time. On the 3rd hour of the battle, a series of shots hit the Relentless Dawn's midsection and knocked out 2 weapon batteries on the starboard side. The ship was now fighting with reduced firepower. But it was still fighting. It had not turned. It had not asked for terms. It had not sent a signal asking for a ceasefire. The second Valkyrie cruiser, the one with the failed shield generator, finally pulled away from the main engagement as well. Its captain filed a damage report and moved to regroup with the retreating first cruiser. What was left was Draxon's own command ship against the relentless Dawn. Draxon engaged directly for the first time. His ship was the most powerful of the three, better armed, better shielded. He was confident this would end things. What he had not fully absorbed yet was that the human ship had now been in combat for 3 hours and its captain had not made a single decision based on what was most comfortable or most survivable. Every decision had been based on what was most effective. There was a difference between those two things, and it turned out the difference mattered quite a lot. Owens put 2 shots into Draxon's forward sensors before the command ship could complete its first attack run. Blind in front, the command ship had to rotate, and while it was rotating it was slow, and slow was exactly what Nolan had been waiting for. The relentless Dawn fired everything it had left on that side. The exchange was short and extremely loud, and when it was over, Draxon's command ship was pulling back with its port engine offline and hull breaches on 2 decks. The human ship was still there. Draxon looked at his damage report. He looked at his screens. The human cruiser sat in the middle of the Tespal system with half its armor gone and 2 weapon batteries dark and its hull scorched in a dozen places. It had not moved toward the planet. It had not exploited the situation below. It had simply fought, absorbed everything 3 Velthari cruisers had thrown at it, and was still sitting there. Draxon said to his bridge crew, "Hold position. Do not engage." His tactical officer asked, "What are we waiting for, Fleet Marshal?" Draxon said, "Reinforcements." And then he said nothing else. In the bunker on Tespal 4, Elder Tessavon watched the battle data with her hands very still and her face very quiet. She watched the Velthari ships pull back, one by one. She watched the human ship stop moving and simply float in orbit, damaged and scarred and present. One of her aides said, "They are still there." Tessavon said, "Yes." She said nothing else. But for the first time in several days, she picked up her cup and took a slow, careful sip of tea. End of Part 3. They thought they were doomed. Until a human warship emerged from the void. Part 4. The guns stopped. For a while, there was only quiet. On the relentless Dawn, quiet meant the sound of the ship working, air recyclers, the low hum of engines at standby, the occasional clang of a repair team moving through a corridor with tools. The battle had left marks everywhere. Sections of the outer hull needed patching. 2 weapon batteries needed parts that the engineering team was already pulling from other systems. The medical bay had 2 patients who were expected to recover fully. Hargrove did a slow walk of the ship. He went deck by deck, not because he needed to inspect anything personally, but because the crew needed to see him. They needed to see that he was still standing and that he was calm and that the walk through the ship was just a normal thing a captain does on a normal day. He spoke to people as he went. He asked a weapons technician how the repair was going. He asked a young crew member in Section 7 whether the temporary seal was holding. He stood in the medical bay for a few minutes and spoke to the 2 injured crew members and told them they had done good work. Then he went back to the bridge. Nolan had the ship in position in high orbit above Tespal 4. The Velthari ships were visible on the long-range sensors, holding at distance, not approaching. The damaged cruiser that had pulled away first was running minimal systems. Draxon's command ship had gone quiet. Hargrove opened a channel to the surface. Tessavon answered quickly this time, as if she had been waiting by the console. Her voice was steadier than the last time he had spoken to her. He told her that the Velthari had pulled back for the moment. He told her they were holding position and keeping orbit. He told her that Velthari reinforcements had been requested, based on what his communications team had intercepted, and that those reinforcements would arrive in roughly 45 hours. He said, "So we have about 45 hours to make this situation different from what it was before they get here." There was a pause. Then Tessavon said, "What do you mean by different?" He said, "I mean we need more people to know what is happening here. And I mean the Velthari need to understand that pressing this siege will cost them more than it is worth." Another pause. Then she said, "You are speaking about politics." He said, "Yes." She said, "I thought you were a military officer." He said, "I am. But I did not come here just to win a fight. I came here so your world survives." The channel was quiet for a moment. Then Tessavon said she understood, and she would do her part. Rosa Vance had been doing something during the battle that she had not mentioned to anyone, because it was not exactly in her orders and she had not had time to ask permission. She had been broadcasting. Not a targeted message to any government or organization. Something simpler and much wider. She had opened every frequency the relentless Dawn had access to, and she had been transmitting the sensor logs of the battle in real time. Raw data. No commentary. No editing. Just the footage of 3 Velthari cruisers attacking one human ship and the human ship fighting back, and the Velthari ships, one by one, pulling away. She had been sending it in every direction she could reach. Hargrove found out when Nolan mentioned it to him quietly, half an hour after the battle ended. He read the communications log himself. Then he looked at Rosa across the bridge. Rosa looked back. She said, "Sir, I thought people should see what was happening here." He said, "You were right. Keep sending." She kept sending. The footage moved through the communications network faster than anyone expected. By the time Hargrove spoke with Tessavon, 42 separate systems had received the transmission. Most of them were small, independent, the kinds of places that watched large powers the way small animals watch large ones, carefully, from a safe distance. But something about the footage made it hard to look away. 1 ship. 3 attackers. The human ship taking hit after hit and not stopping. People who had spent years watching the Velthari Dominion expand its reach and swallow smaller nations without opposition were watching something they had not seen before. The Merchant Leagues issued a statement. It was written in careful, neutral language the way their statements always were, talking about the importance of open trade routes and the economic impact of blockades on the Tespal system's agricultural supply chains. It was the language of business and money. But underneath that language, the meaning was clear: the leagues were watching, and they were not pleased. 2 of the independent systems that had previously said nothing about the siege sent quiet messages to each other. The messages were not sent to the Orin Collective. They were private. But one of Rosa's passive listening arrays picked up the edge of the signal, and she noted it without saying anything yet. On 2 other Orin member worlds, people were watching the footage on every screen they had. The Orin Collective had 6 member species. Most of them had civilian ships, cargo haulers, research vessels, converted transports. Not warships. Nothing designed for fighting. But people were having conversations, and those conversations were about whether staying home was the same as giving up. It turned out, for some of them, it was. Nolan came to Hargrove that evening, during the quiet period when the day crew had handed off to the night crew and the bridge was dim and calm. She sat down in the empty chair beside him and looked at the screens for a while without speaking. Then she said, "I need to ask you something honestly." He said, "Go ahead." She said, "When we came into this system this morning and you saw what we were looking at, did you think we were going to come through that engagement?" He was quiet for a moment. Not because he was deciding whether to answer, but because he was finding the honest words. He said, "I thought the odds were poor." She nodded slowly. She said, "You did not tell the crew that." He said, "No." She said, "Why not?" He looked at the screen. The damaged hull sections were visible on the external cameras, raw and scorched against the dark. He said, "Because they did not need to know the odds. They needed to fly." Nolan looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the screen. She said, "Velthari reinforcements in 43 hours. He said, "I know." She said, "We need a very different situation in 43 hours. He said, "I know that too." Outside the ship, the Velthari held their position in the dark. The planet below turned slowly, green and quiet, 11 million people living their lives inside a bubble of shields that was still holding. Rosa kept broadcasting. The footage kept moving outward through the galaxy, system by system, reaching people who had been watching the Velthari expand for years and had stopped believing that anyone would ever push back. Now they had seen something push back. And some of them had started to wonder if watching from a distance was still the right choice. End of Part 4. They thought they were doomed. Until a human warship emerged from the void. Part 5. The reinforcements arrived early. Nolan spotted them on long-range sensors 6 hours before she had expected them. 6 Velthari cruisers and 1 command ship, moving in tight formation from the transit corridor on the far side of the system. 9 ships total when added to the 3 already present, though the damaged ones were still running partial systems. She stood at her display and counted them twice. Then she called Hargrove. He came to the bridge, looked at the screen, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Get me a count on everything else in the system." Nolan said. Already done. There are 9 additional contacts in the system, sir. None of them are Velthari. He looked at her. She said, 2 Orin cargo haulers modified with external weapons mounts. 1 research vessel flying an independent flag. 3 converted freighters from the Sol community, which is the oldest of the Orin member species. 1 forum observer ship that has moved from its holding position to within combat range. And 2 independent system traders with rail guns attached to their hulls in a configuration that I would describe as improvised but functional. Hargrove looked at the screen for a long moment. He said, none of those are warships. Nolan said, no, sir. Not even close. He said, who told them to come? She said, nobody, as far as I can tell. They appear to have decided on their own. Rosa, at her station, said quietly, sir, I have been receiving their transmissions for the past 4 hours. They saw the footage. Most of them have been talking to each other on the open channels. They know what they are flying into. They came anyway. The bridge was very quiet for a moment. Then Hargrove said, open a channel to the Velthari fleet. Rosa opened it. On the Velthari command ship, Fleet Marshal Draxon had just finished reviewing his reinforcement deployment when the channel request came in. He accepted it. The human captain appeared on his screen, the one with the sealed cut on his forehead and the calm eyes, and the ship that had survived 3 of Draxon's cruisers for 3 hours. Hargrove said, Fleet Marshal, I want to share some information with you before either of us makes a decision we cannot take back. Draxon said nothing. He listened. Hargrove said, 42 galactic systems have received and viewed footage of this engagement. That footage has been confirmed by 3 independent sensor networks and the Forum Observer ship currently in this system. It is not disputed data. He said, the Merchant Leagues issued a statement 4 hours ago that they are reviewing trade access through Velthari-controlled corridors in response to what they described as economically destabilizing aggression in a neutral system. That review process, based on League procedure, will take 6 months. During those 6 months, 17 supply lines that currently pass through Velthari space will be rerouted. He said, 3 independent military systems have formally registered a request with the Galactic Forum to participate in the defense of Tespal 4. Under Forum protocol, that request gives them legal standing to enter this system. They will arrive in approximately 6 hours. He said, you currently have 9 ships. We currently have 10, and none of the 9 on our side that are not mine have any reason to be here except that they chose to come. He let that sit for a moment. Then he said, Fleet Marshal, you can press this attack. You will probably destroy some of these ships. You will take losses that your fleet can absorb. You may even complete your siege of this planet, though I would encourage you to think carefully about what completing it will look like to the 42 systems that are currently watching. Or you can stand down, file a navigational incident report, and preserve the Dominion's political standing with the Galactic Forum, which your government has spent considerable effort maintaining for 30 years. He said, you have 20 minutes. I will not contact you again during that time. He closed the channel. Draxon sat in his command chair and looked at the screen. On one side, 9 ships, one of which was a battered human cruiser held together with repair patches and willpower. The others were cargo haulers and converted freighters and a research ship and a forum observer who had apparently decided that observing was not enough. On the other side, 9 Velthari warships, the finest in the Dominion fleet. He had the firepower. He had the numbers, ship for ship. He could win this battle. But the human had not talked about winning the battle. He had talked about what winning the battle would cost. And Draxon was not a stupid man. He had spent 40 years reading political situations as carefully as tactical ones, and when he looked at what had happened in the last 24 hours, he saw something he had not expected to see. He saw a situation that had changed. The Velthari Dominion was powerful because other people believed it was powerful and believed that opposing it was not worth the cost. That belief was the foundation of everything. It was more important than any single trade lane or any single colony world. If that belief cracked, the Dominion had a much larger problem than one system. He did not think about the human captain or the civilian ships or the old alien diplomat in the bunker below. He thought about the 42 systems watching, and the Merchant Leagues, and the Forum Observer, and what 48 hours of footage had done to the story the Dominion had always told about itself. He told his fleet, withdraw to the outer system. File a navigational incident report. We are done here. His tactical officer said, Fleet Marshal. He said, "You heard me." They heard him. Tessa Vaughn was sitting at the communications console in the bunker, the same chair she had been in for 4 days, when the alert came through. Velthari ships were moving. Not toward the planet. Away from it. All of them, the damaged ones and the reinforcements both, pulling back in an orderly formation toward the transit corridor. She watched the screens for a full minute without speaking. Then she said, "Get me the human ship." The channel connected. Hargrove answered. Tessa Vaughn looked at the screen and found, for the first time in 4 days, that she did not have the words she wanted. She had spent 60 years as a diplomat and she knew many words in many languages, and none of them felt adequate. She said, "Captain, I do not know how to say what I want to say to you and your crew." He said, "You do not need to." She said, "My people had stopped believing that anyone was coming. We had sent every signal we knew how to send and the silence answered us. And then you arrived. One ship. And you stayed." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We heard your signal." That was enough. He said goodbye. He closed the channel. Nolan was already scheduling the hull repairs. Owens was running a full weapons inventory. Rosa was still at her station, and she had changed what she was broadcasting. No more battle footage. Something simpler now. Just a short message going out on every frequency the ship could reach, in every language the translation system knew. It said, "We are here." The Relentless Dawn held orbit above Tespal 4 for 3 more days. The first Forum mediators arrived. The independent ships that had come to join the defense began the long journey home. The Oran colonial government started the work of rebuilding what the Velthari bombardment had damaged. On the morning of the 4th day, Hargrove gave the order to break orbit. The Relentless Dawn turned and moved toward the edge of the system, toward the dark and the quiet and the long stretch of space between this place and the next. Rosa sat at her station and kept listening. The frequencies were always full of something. Noise, signals, data, voices from places so far away it took years for the sound to arrive. Sometimes, buried in all of that, there was a signal that mattered. She would be listening for it. She always was.